Hello, welcome to Cold Hardy Winter Vegetables. My name's Pam Dawling and I am the author of two books, Sustainable Market Farming and the Year-Round Hoop House. I have a website, sustainablemarketfarming.com, and I do a blog post there every week. You can go there and browse, you can sign up to get a message in your email every week, or you can see it on Facebook. And there is a PDF handout that goes along with this presentation. So I live and farm at Twin Oaks Community in Central Virginia. We're located on Monacan land. We're in US Winter Hardiness Zone 7A. Our average last frost is April 30th. Our average first frost is October 14th. So you can compare with what it's like where you are. And our goal with our vegetable production is to feed our intentional community of 100 people with a wide range of organic produce all year round. If you want to know more about the community, you can go to our website, twinoaks.org. Today I'm just going to talk about vegetables. So what I'm going to talk about is why you might want to grow winter vegetables, different kinds of cold weather crop protection, a table of cold hardiness of various vegetables, 3 ranges for cold hardy crops, and then details about suitable crops, and then crop storage methods. And then I have the resources. They're on the slides here, but they're also on the handout, along with all the tables and lists and charts, so you don't have to write all that stuff down. So be sure to look for the PDF handout. So, why would you grow winter vegetables? Well, it's no secret that people eat all year round. And also you might have noticed the locavore movement is growing, and more local seasonal vegetables are in demand. If you're growing for sale, you'll be able to keep your customers from one big season to the next big season. Also keep your crew, and we all know that experienced crew are so valuable. You'll be able to keep in shape, and it's not just like an endless summer. It's much easier. There are fewer crops to care for, and the weeds grow slower and the bugs are not really around. And as with all season extension, you want to extend the season without overworking yourself or your crew or your soil. And it is much easier to get extra harvests for a month or two in the fall from mature plants you already have than it is to get harvests a week earlier in the spring. So you want to compare the costs and benefits of various types of cold weather crop protection and decide for yourself what's worthwhile. Talk with other growers, get their opinions from their experience. Definitely think about the economics of season extension, because you will be putting in more time and money than you do in the main season, and you want that to be worthwhile. What you're getting out needs to exceed what you're putting in. Row cover is the first basic kind of crop protection. Quick hoops and caterpillar tunnels come next. Cold frames and unheated greenhouses and hoop houses. So you might be familiar with row cover. It's lightweight and easy to use and easy to store and tends to blow away if you're unlucky. It does work to keep your crops alive and productive beyond their normal winter kill temperatures, and it's also useful in the spring to keep early crops alive. You get better quality produce, reduced weather damage, pest damage, and the microclimate under hooped row covers is really very pleasant in chilly, windy weather. Just roll up your sleeve and stick your arm in the tunnel sometime. You do need to hold down the edges with something, bags of rocks or sand, jugs of water, metal or wooden stakes lying on the edges. And you do need to get thick row cover to protect against cold. We like Typar. It's 1.25 ounces a square yard. It's spun bonded polypro, 75% light transmission, and about 6 Fahrenheit degrees of frost protection. It's very durable. It can last 6 years or more. The thinner types, I don't recommend them. They're really to protect from insects mostly, and netting does a better job in my opinion. If you've got thinner row cover, you can just use it doubled up as cold protection. But the thinner types are more fragile. So if you have a lot of helpers, you don't want the thin row cover. There are various ways to avoid the pitfalls of row cover. One is that the weeds grow secretly out of sight, so be sure to look. The row cover does reduce light levels, but we have found it not to be a problem. If you get a long mild spell, you will want to ventilate your covered crops so they don't lose all their cold tolerance. And hoops are a great thing to keep your row cover from sticking to the frozen leaves and to reduce abrasion. We make these double hoops to use in the winter. The inner hoops are 9 or 10 gauge wire, and they've got legs that we stick into the ground. We bend the wire around to make eyes. We put one of these big hoops in every 6 feet along the row. Then we put the row cover over the top and pull it tight, and then take these thinner hoops that are made of 22 gauge wire. We bend the ends round and poke them through the eyelets of the big hoops, and that helps hold the row cover in place. And then for each 6 foot gap, we use a 5 foot stick rolled under to hold the row cover down. If you don't want to do this, you don't want to make your own hoops, there are spring steel hoops which you can buy. They're nice to store because they kind of spring back into a relaxed bow shape and they don't get tangled. They seem to only come in 64-inch length though, so that's a bit of a challenge. Next up, we have quick hoops and caterpillar tunnels. Quick hoops often cover more than one bed. They're low to the ground. You can use row cover and then plastic for the winter, but we think these are best for areas with reliably steady cold winters, not the back and forth kind of winters that we get in the mid-Atlantic, because sometimes we would not want our crops to be under polyethylene. These quick hoops are also best for storing crops till spring rather than for harvesting during the winter, which is what we want to be doing with most of our crops. So we don't use those. Caterpillar tunnels, on the other hand, are usually tall enough to walk in, and they sometimes cover like 2 beds and a path, or even 4 beds and 3 paths, and they have plastic or row cover which is held down by ropes at each hoop. So you don't need sandbags because you've got that rope firmly holding everything down. You don't need anything else to hold the edges down. Cold frames are traditionally made from blocks or boards or straw bales with some kind of discarded windows on the top. And they're really useful on small scale, but they are labor intensive, and if you're working on a larger scale, the construction costs of a hoop house are lower than for the same area of cold frames. And just for confusion, single layer hoop houses are sometimes called cold frames. So if you're hearing about or reading about people walking around inside cold frames, they haven't been shrunk to garden gnome size. They're talking about single layer hoop houses. In this photo of our cold frames, behind the cold frames you see our greenhouse. It doesn't have any supplementary heating. It's got a masonry north wall, and the windows are all discarded patio doors. And we grow lettuces in there all winter without any extra row cover. Hoop houses are next up. They're incredibly productive. The crops grow much faster than outdoors. The crop quality is wonderful, especially the leafy greens. You grow the crops in the ground with drip irrigation often, and this means that you don't have to water 4 times a day or anything. They're fairly independent. Working inside a hoop house in the winter is so much nicer than dealing with frozen row cover or hoops outdoors or frozen fingers. You can have hoop houses with 1 or 2 layers of plastic. I definitely recommend 2 layers of plastic with a small electric blower to inflate the gap. If you don't have electricity, there's a product called Solar Wrap, which is like bubble plastic on steroids, that comes in rolls. So you could look into that. I have a lot of slideshows about hoop houses. So here's a list of them. Anytime you see the red box with the little screen icon in it, it tells you about other related slideshows that I have. And they're all up on slideshare.net. So you can go there, put my name, Pam Dawling, in the search box, and you can find different slideshows. You won't hear me speaking, but you can watch the slides at your own pace, and it's all free. So, winter hoop houses. The nighttime protection of 2 layers of plastic with an air gap mean that it's 8 Fahrenheit degrees warmer at night inside than outside. Single layer hoop houses, however, are not much warmer at night than outdoors. It's just like having a plastic bag between you and outer space, and you can't expect a miracle. In our double layer hoop house, the plants can tolerate 14 Fahrenheit colder than they can outside without us adding any extra row cover. So that means in our hoop house, the salad greens survive when it's 14 Fahrenheit outdoors without us adding row cover. If it gets down to 8 Fahrenheit or less, we will put row cover over those plants. They can survive at least one night when it's -12 Fahrenheit outside. We hope not to get temperatures like that too often. Next is my table of winter kill temperatures. This is all on your handout. This is a chart with killing temperatures outdoors without any row cover, unless it's otherwise stated. So you can take into account what kind of crop protection you've got. Snow cover will help keep plants alive. We don't often get solid snow cover for long. If you get wind or sudden or repeated cold spells, your crops are more likely to die. So I already did mention this bit about double layer hoop houses. Crops can survive 14 Fahrenheit colder than they can outside without row cover, and at least 21 Fahrenheit colder than outside if you add some thick row cover for the night. So I'm not going to read this whole table because it is all on your handout with more information, with more variety names and with cover crops included. So you know what happens at 32. We're well practiced at knowing what to do when we get that first frost. At 27 Fahrenheit, some cabbage varieties will die, as will sugarloaf chicory. At 25, some other cabbage varieties will die. So when you're choosing varieties, look in the small print and see just how cold hardy your variety that you've taken a fancy to, how cold hardy it is. Chinese Napa cabbage is good to 25. Some of the other Asian greens like Maruba Santo, Mizuna, most of the pak choys, Tokyo Bacana. Some onion scallions will die at 25, but there's some which are much, much, much hardier. Rhubarb stems and leaves. And then as it gets colder, down at 22, some arugula varieties will die. Bright lights and other multicolored chard. The larger leaves of lettuce. At 20, some beets will die, some broccoli, some Brussels sprouts, some more cabbages. Don't despair if you can see that the outer leaves of your cabbage are damaged. It's possible that the insides are still good. Celeriac celtus, some collards, some head lettuce, some mustards. Flat-leaved parsley dies at 20, and you'll soon see curly-leafed parsleys go down to 15. Some more beets and beet greens and broccoli and cabbage will die at 15. Row-covered celery, red chard. Most covered turnips are good down to 15. At 12 degrees Fahrenheit, some beets, some broccoli, some Brussels sprouts, some cabbage. Also carrots will die at 12. Most collards, garlic tops if they're still large, fall varieties of leeks, covered rutabagas, senposai leaves. Down at 10, even covered beets will die. Purple sprouting broccoli if you're growing that for spring. Green chard dies at 10. It's much hardier than the red ones and the multicolored ones. Some collards are good down to 10. Some leeks, some lettuce, blah, 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 etc. Big leaves of Savoyed spinach. Savoyed spinach is more hardy than the smooth-leafed kinds. Tatsoi, Yucchina Savoy, go down to 10. Down to 5. Garlic tops, even if they're small, will die at 5. Some kale, some leeks, some bulb onions, unprotected small lettuces. Yes, 5 is getting cold, isn't it? 0 Fahrenheit chives will die. Some collards, some corn salad, Jerusalem artichokes, parsnips will die at 0. These next temperatures are more cold than I hope to meet very often. -5, we grow Vates kale outdoors. It survived, although some leaves were too damaged to use. So -5 is kind of borderline for any kale. Vates is about the coldest one I've found. -10, I have heard that Walla Walla onions that were sown in late summer will be good down to -10 in the winter. So I don't have experience of that. -30 to -40, I've heard that narrow leaf sorrel and claytonia and January king cabbage might be good. I don't really know about those things. You're on your own, sorry. So next up, I'm going to talk about 3 ranges of cold hardy crops, because they're not all equally cold hardy, and it's useful to be able to think of them in groups so you know when it's time to bring all that stuff in. So the first range is crops that you keep alive in the ground into the winter until it gets down to somewhere between 22 and 15, depending on the exact crop, and then you harvest them and either use them soon or store them. And I have a slideshow about fall vegetable production. The second category is hardy crops that you can store in the ground and harvest during the winter. So for us in Zone 7A, they need to be hardy down to 0, really. Really, 0 Fahrenheit, they do. I have a slideshow on storage vegetables. And the third category is overwintering crops to harvest in the spring. We'll see more about those. So here's the first category. Things you can keep alive in the ground until it gets somewhat cold and then use soon or store. The use soon group is mostly the greens, Asian greens, chard, lettuce, but also radishes, some cabbages. The storage group includes beets, carrots, celeriac, kohlrabi, winter radish, rutabagas and turnips. They're all roots, and some cabbages. And the second category of things you can store in the ground and harvest during the winter. For us, that's collards, horseradish, Jerusalem artichokes, kale, leeks, parsnips, scallions and spinach. And then the overwintering crops for spring harvests. For us, that could be carrots, chard, collards, garlic, garlic scallions, kale, multiplier onions, scallions and spinach. Here we are planting garlic. So I'm going to look in more detail at different crops by family or type. So first we'll do the leafy cooking greens, then the salad greens, then the roots, then the alliums. So here's some cold hardy cooking greens. Amongst the Asian greens, tatsoi and Yucchina Savoy are 2 that are particularly cold hardy. Tatsoi is described as a small flat rosette of shiny dark green spoon-shaped leaves with white stems. It's actually not that small. It can be 10 inches across easily. It's only flat if you give it lots of space. If you really crowd the plants in, it's more flower pot shaped. Tatsoi is very beautiful. It has a mild flavor. It's very easy to grow. It's very cold tolerant, some of them down to 10. You can direct sow and thin into salad mixes when the plants are still just a couple of inches across. You just nip the roots off and you throw the little whole plant into the salad mix. And then bit by bit you thin out the row until you've got the big plants at 10 inches across, and you can harvest the whole plant for cooking greens. Or you can, if you don't want to direct sow, you can transplant them 6 inches apart. Take 21 days to become baby salad size, 45 days for cooking size. And that's pretty much general for Asian greens. 21 days baby, 45 days mature crop. And then another of our favorites, which is in the photo on the right, is Yucchina Savoy. It's a bit like a bigger tatsoi. It's got the same sort of rosette format, but it's bigger, and it's got blistered dark green leaves, green stems. It's about 12 inches across and 12 inches tall. You can harvest leaves or you can take the whole plant. Again, 21 days to baby size, 45 days to full size. It's heat and cold tolerant. I think I might have said that already. This is Komatsuna. It's also known as mustard spinach or summerfest. There are green ones, dark green, you'll see in this photo. There are also purple ones that are called red. It has a mild flavour. You can pick individual leaves, bunch them, or you can take the whole plant. This one is even faster growing than the last ones. It only takes 35 days to reach full size. This is Senpo Sai, my all-round favourite Asian green. It's both heat and cold tolerant. It's a big productive plant. It's non-heading. It has large, round, medium green leaves that don't actually look very exciting, but they are delicious and very tender. So you want to transplant Senpo Sai 12 to 18 inches apart because, as I said, it's a big plant. It only takes 40 days to reach maturity, and you usually will harvest it by the leaf because it isn't going to head up, and you just want it to keep on producing more. Yes, cooks quickly, delicious sweet cabbage flavor, very tender. It's actually a cross between Komatsuna and regular cabbage. So in terms of scheduling your Asian greens so you've got them at the right stage before it gets too cold, the most cold hardy ones can be harvested all winter in milder climates or kept alive to revive in the spring. They're going to bolt early in the spring. All these greens, these brassicas, will bolt. Not the chard so much, but the brassicas will. So we start sowing our fall Asian greens for outdoor planting the same dates that we sow fall broccoli and cabbage. So you treat them just the same as you would those crops. So for us it's going to be from late June to mid to late July. Row covers really help keep them in good condition. If you want really cold tolerant ones, go to Wild Garden Seeds and Even Star Farm and get a hoop house if you can. This is a cabbage. This beautiful cabbage here is Dead On from Johnny's. It's good down to 10 Fahrenheit. We plan to leave it in the ground all winter, but if we get a forecast it's going to be 10 Fahrenheit, then we'll go out and harvest it. It might be middle of December, late December, or even January by then. Next we have chard and beet greens. Chard is much easier to germinate in warm conditions than spinach is. And almost all green chard is hardy to 10 without row cover, so you can leave it into the winter. It's hardier than the multicolored and red chards. Don't leave those into the winter. So to keep them in good condition, if you're in zone 6 or warmer, you can use hoops and row cover over your chard. If you're in a colder zone, you want to make a last harvest before it gets really cold, cutting off the leaves above the growing point and then mulch heavily right over the plants with straw or something, or you could use straw and then some kind of row cover with hoops to hold it all in place, and it will give you an early crop in the spring. Moving on to kale. This is Vate's kale, our favorite. It's very hardy. It's not very big, to be honest. So we plant them 12 inches apart. We grow 7 beds, 360 row feet each, for 100 people to go over the winter, to feed us through the winter, and then we plant another 3 beds in the spring. So we can pick 1 bed of kale every day in October, November, February and March, and kale is going to make some growth whenever the temperature is above about 40 Fahrenheit. So we can also make some harvests in December and January outdoors. Because we want a lot of kale, we don't have enough time to transplant all that. So we do a mixed direct sowing and transplanting method by sowing 2 beds at a time, 3 times. That's only 6, isn't it? It's not 7. So every 6 days we will sow 2 beds with 4 rows 10 inches apart, and we water them carefully. The idea is that we only really have to pay close attention to 2 beds at a time. So within them, if we've got some bare patches, we will carefully dig up some of our surplus plants and transplant them. Spinach is one of our favourite winter greens. It's cold hardy down to 0 outdoors. We grow Escalade, Reflect, Acadia, and also the smooth-leafed Renegade. We don't so much like the smooth-leafed ones, but Renegade makes really fast growth in November and December. So if we want a lot of spinach then, that's the variety we'll sow. And then after that we will sow Acadia and Escalade for the winter. And then in January we'll sow Reflect to transplant outdoors later. It's more resistant to bolting than those. So we grow 7 outdoor beds for 100 people, same amount as for kale. We use double hoops and row cover for these. We pick the spinach throughout the winter whenever the leaves are big enough. We aim for 1 bed each day, October, November, February, March, as with kale. And it also makes growth whenever the temperature's above 40. So we can sometimes harvest, not every week, but you know, once every few weeks in December and January. And get a hoop house if you can. Keep saying that, don't I? So when to sow the spinach for the fall and for the winter and for the overwintering crops. So as far as the time goes, 8 weeks before the first fall frost date is a good time to start planting spinach, but it can be too hot then. So if your soil is 85 Fahrenheit, don't sow spinach. Wait for it to cool down. If you see dead nettle, chickweed and henbit starting to germinate, the soil has also cooled enough for spinach. If you want to really establish spinach earlier, pre-sprout the seeds in the fridge for a week. We do this for our first beds. We start sprouting the spinach about September 1st. As far as getting the right size spinach when it gets cold, we've found for us September 20th is the latest we can sow spinach to harvest during the winter outdoors. In the hoop house we sow from early September to early November, and we're harvesting that from November to April. And then for crops that we're going to leave alone until the spring, we sow 2 beds of spinach September 20th to the 30th, or even early October, and we'll start harvesting those from late February. It will bolt a bit later than the overwintered spinach and a bit earlier than the spring sown beds, so it will bridge our supply. And what you can see here is peas, snap peas. We sow down the middle of our spinach beds March the 1st, and that way the pea plants will benefit from the same row cover as the spinach. And when the spinach doesn't want the row cover anymore, we pack away the row cover, and then before it bolts we'll harvest out that spinach and stake the peas, and the bed will be converted into a pea bed without need to. Here are some lovely collards. We regularly overwinter Morris Heading collards outdoors without row cover. It's hardy down to 0. Most collards are hardy down to 12 if you know, again, read the small print. We harvest small amounts of collards throughout the winter, and then when spring arrives the production really ramps up and we get lots of big harvests sooner than we would from any new spring sown crops. Cold weather lettuce is very worthwhile. There are specialized cold hardy varieties that won't tolerate heat because they've got low water content. So make the most of those for the fall and the winter. Lettuce can survive an occasional dip to 10 Fahrenheit if you've got row cover on it, but not 8. And half-size, half-grown lettuce is more cold-hardy than full-size plants. I have a whole slideshow about lettuce year-round as well. Here's some varieties that we found to be particularly cold-hardy for fall and winter growing. The ones in bold are the best of the best: Buckley, Green Forest, Hampton, Red Tinged Winter, Revolution, Tango and Winter Marvel. Although these are all good. And we found that in our hoop house we can grow the salad bowls, although they're too kind of delicate to grow outdoors in cold weather. So in order to get your lettuce planted at the right time in the fall, for outdoor growing we sow every 6 or 7 days in June and July, every 5 days in early August, every 3 days in late August, and then every other day until September 21st. That's for growing outdoors, and the last beds will be covered with row cover. For our cold frames we would sow in early September. For our unheated greenhouse we sow in mid-September, and for planting in our hoop house mid to late September. Small salad crops, there are some very cold hardy small crops. Sylvetta, Surrey, Astro and this even star arugula are very cold hardy. Also parsley, Belle Isle upland cress, winter purslane, minutina, salad burnet, sorrel, saltwort and corn salad. They're all very winter hardy. These are all small plants that grow slowly and produce small yields. They're great if you're in a place with very long winters and you get very bored of kale and spinach and lettuce and you want some different things. They're also great if you've got some restaurant accounts that are going to pay you for the time and the yield rate. Otherwise, you might not grow these. Carrots are cold hardy down to 12. You do need to keep the soil surface damp until they come through. We grow Danvers 126 as our standard. These photos are Danvers half long. It's very similar. We grow a big planting of fall carrots, as you can see here in this photo, and we flame our carrot beds the day before the carrots are due to emerge. We use indicator beets, which means we sow a few beets at the head of the carrot bed, and the day the beets come up, and they're easy to see because they're red, that's the day when we flame, as you see in the lower photo. And then we hoe between the rows as soon as we can, and then we weed and thin to 1 inch once the carrots are about 1 inch tall, and once the carrots are salad size we weed again and thin to 3 inches. So as I said, we do a big planting very early in August for fall carrots, and we plan for that to be enough to store and feed us all winter. So it's going to be a lot of carrots. We harvest them in late November into carts like this, and then we trim them, wash them, sort them. The good ones we store in perforated plastic bags in a walk-in cooler. We have overwintered Danvers outside, but we have a lot of voles, so we have to keep an eye on them and make sure that the voles are not eating what we wanted to eat ourselves. Beets are another great storage crop and fall crop. We like Cylindra, although this picture is Crosby Egyptian. They're also nice, but we like Cylindra because they're very productive, very tender, very easy to peel and easy to slice. So you need to maintain a soil temperature below 85 for a few days for the beets to come up. You can pre-soak the seed, not for too long though, because it's easy to drown beet seeds. If you want to plant dry seed, you can use the earthway seeder with the charred plate. Sow them 1 inch deep at the most, tamp the soil down so you get good contact, and they'll come up pretty quickly in warm soil. If you want to flame weed your beets, you can use radish seed as the indicator, and they will germinate 1 or 2 days sooner than the beets. For winter plant, for fall fresh eating and winter storage crops, we aim to sow on August the 1st. We have August 20th down as our last date for fall beets, but I think we've done them a bit later. If we do sow them early in August, we start harvesting September 20th, taking out the biggest ones. We continue harvesting till November 15th when we get the last of them out, and we trim them and wash them and sort them, and we store those in a walk-in cooler in perforated plastic bags as well. This strange vegetable is celeriac. It's got a nice sort of nutty taste. I rather like it. It's known as turnip rooted celery, but it doesn't really taste of turnips. It is a bit difficult to grow. It's slow growing, so it will occupy your mind and your land for quite a long time. 85 days to transplant size and 95 days from transplant to maturity. And the seed needs light to germinate and can be slow, and you don't want to get the seedlings cold. So if I haven't totally put you off, if you want to grow some more different storage crops, this is a good one. It does store very well, again in perforated plastic bags. You do need to keep the weeds away. This is kohlrabi, much quicker to grow, another odd one but quick to grow. These Vienna ones only take 58 days from sowing to harvest. You can direct sow or you can transplant them. They do fine as transplants. We've transplanted them on August the 3rd, 3 or 4 week old transplants, and then we harvest those at the end of October. But you could do it a bit later than that because the cold tolerance is more. And again, they store well in perforated plastic bags in a cooler. Radishes, there are the big, large winter radishes. We sow ours August the 4th. They definitely don't want to be sown earlier or they will bolt. We've sometimes had people mistakenly sow these in the spring, not reading the packages carefully. So sow them August the 4th, harvest them in October or November before the temperatures get down to 20 Fahrenheit. They store really well, they're super productive. You can make kimchi and salads and stir fries and stews and all sorts of things. Once again, plastic bags under refrigeration. The little baby radishes, we like Easter egg and white icicle and cherry bell. We do 2 fall outdoor sowings early August, and we do 6 hoop house sowings from September 6th to January 26th. And exactly how long they take to maturity depends how many days you have when it's too cold for them to grow in the winter. These are rutabagas. They're a bit like turnips. They have necks and they have lateral roots, which have mostly been trimmed off for the benefit of this photo. They're slower growing and more cold hardy than turnips, and they taste a bit different too. 90 days to maturity, so you need to sow them 35 days before you would sow your fall turnips. For us, that's the beginning of July. You can store them in the ground, certainly for quite a while, until it gets down below 20. You could, if you wanted, simply mulch over them in place before you get down to 15 Fahrenheit, or you can harvest them and store them. Turnips, these ones are Scarlet Ono Revival, which I think is very pretty. They're faster growing than rutabagas and less cold hardy. We grow them outdoors in the spring and in the fall. We usually just do purple top white globe outdoors. Harvest those in October and November before the temperatures drop to 20. And in the hoop house, we grow Scarlet Ono, Hackaway, Red Round, White Egg. Hackaway is the pop star kind of turnip, but it's also one of the least cold tolerant. Almost the whole turnip is sitting on the surface of the soil, so don't grow that one outdoors in the winter. This unusual crop is horseradish, and it's a perennial. It's very easily propagated from pieces of root, and it's traditionally harvested September to April, the months with R in them. And you can, if you like, you can harvest roots, clean them up, and then just store them for several months in the refrigerator until you're ready to use them. Horseradish can be a great thing to provide some value-added products for out-of-season sales. When you're peeling the horseradish, throw the scraps in the trash. Don't throw them in the compost pile because they might survive and take root wherever you spread your compost. Also, when you're grinding it up, I recommend doing it on the porch and wear goggles. The fumes are impressive. These are Jerusalem artichokes. They're related to sunflowers. They grow 10 feet tall. Under the ground you get these knobbly things, different colors. I recommend you make sure to get a smooth shaped one, not a knobbly one, otherwise they can be very annoying to clean. Also, I recommend that you have a semi-permanent plot because anything you don't manage to dig up will regrow the next year. You can dig them up any time from late fall to early spring if the ground's not frozen. The cool weather will improve the flavour. You can get 100 pounds from 25 square feet, and you can store them in a root cellar or in the refrigerator. You can save the small ones to replant any time from early spring to last frost, but if you want big ones, plant them early to get a long growing season. These are parsnips. Surprisingly, they thrive in mild weather. They're a cold hardy crop, but they will grow quite well in warm weather. They are slow growing, so even if you're not planning to dig them up till November, start them in March or April. They need at least 110 days before the winter gets too cold for them to grow anymore. And then you want to wait for frosts before you harvest them, because the frosts really improve the flavour. And if you've grown parsnips before and you are put off by the odd shape and the hollow crown, you might be more happy to grow the hybrids, which are smoother, like you can see in the small photo there. Then there are winter harvest leeks. Unlike onions, leeks are independent of day length and they just keep growing. If you left them in the ground all winter, they would start bolting, not very early in spring, but in spring they would start to make some fantastic flower heads. So you can dig them up anytime you like in the winter. They are slow growing again, another one of those. So start them in March or April. And be clear that there are two kinds of leeks, two main kinds anyway. They're the less hardy, faster growing fall leeks that often have lighter green leaves and a sort of round arrangement of the leaves. They're not winter hardy north of zone 8. And then there are the blue-green hardy winter leeks with a sort of flatter fan-shaped growth habit. We like Tadorna and Bandit and King Sieg and Bleu de Soleil. Any of those, very hardy, delicious. Scallions I mentioned earlier. They're a perennial that are often grown as an annual. They don't form bulbs. You can simply dig up the plants when they're big enough and harvest them then, or you can wait until they divide into clusters and replant them and keep your perennial patch going. Evergreen hardy white and white Lisbon are varieties that are both hardy down to 0 Fahrenheit. Garlic is another crop that you want to be growing over the winter. Fall planting is definitely best. The garlic will come up quickly in the warm soil of the fall, so don't do it too soon. Wait till your 9 AM soil temperature is 50 Fahrenheit at 4 inches deep. If you're metric, it's 10 at 10. So for us, that's early November, or even mid-November these days. If the soil is unusually warm, just wait a week. Don't plant too early. The harvest dates are going to be regulated by the day length, so you can't make the harvest be earlier, but you can influence the size of the bulbs by keeping the plants alive over the winter. The roots can grow whenever the ground isn't frozen and underneath a 3-inch mulch. That's going to be fairly often. The tops will grow whenever the temperature's above 40. I have a whole slideshow about garlic. If you plant it too late, there won't be enough root growth before the winter, and you'll get a lower survival rate and also smaller bulbs. But if you plant too early, you get too much tender top growth and then it gets frozen back. So you want enough top growth so that the garlic can get off to a roaring start in the spring, but not so much that the leaves just can't endure the winter. Now often we find our garlic gets frozen back to the ground. It will regrow and be fine. If it dies back twice, you definitely don't get such good yields, but nothing you can do about it then, except vow to plant later next time. When it's properly planted, garlic can withstand winter lows of -30 Fahrenheit. This photograph is, I would say, early April. These are multiplier onions, yellow potato onions, the kind that we've grown. They are in many ways similar to growing garlic, except you've got different size bulbs. So if you're going to plant large bulbs, do it in September. Plant medium-sized ones late October or early November, and plant small ones in November or January. And then mulch over the top immediately and do nothing all winter. Weed them in the spring, and then as the tops start to fall in June, go through a couple of times a week, gently lifting the ones with the fallen leaves. They won't all do it on the same day, so you need to go through more than once. Take them away to cure and finish drying down. The largest ones you either want to eat or save back some for planting until September, or possibly even save them in the fridge until September. Or you could sell them, right away. And then the smaller ones, you cure them and store them until it's time to replant. Or you could, if you've got lots, you can sell some for growing, and you'll get a good price for that. These are garlic scallions. They're actually small whole garlic plants. They're very tasty and very attractive, and they're ready March and April, the hungry gap, when no new spring crops are ready yet, or hardly anything. Because they've got strong flavor, you only need 3 to 6 in a bunch if you're selling them, and they will supply garlic taste at a time when your supply of bulb garlic might have run out. The way we do it is that when we're planting our main garlic crop, we save back the tiny cloves, and then we plant them really close together in close little furrows, just somewhere handy. You can instead plant small whole bulbs if you've got some garlic that didn't do so well and you're looking at a lot of bulbs and you don't want to be peeling all those. Just plant the whole bulb and you get a bunch of scallions right there. And some people have found that this can be more profitable than growing on to the bulb stage. So bear that in mind. Yes, I think I told you some of this already. Grow them close together, doesn't matter which way up. Ours are ready from early March. Once they get to 7 to 8 inches tall, loosen the soil, lift them out, trim the roots, tidy them up, rinse them, bundle them, put them in a little bit of water, and you're done. And for us, if we have enough, we can still be harvesting these till May. That's the last of the fresh crops. And next I want to talk about storage of vegetables in winter, because by storing crops you have a long season of availability. You can carry on eating and or selling your crops without having to do much work at all. Lots of crops can be stored without electricity, maybe using buildings that have other purposes at the height of your growing season, like barns and basements and so on. There's a Washington State University Extension publication, Storing Vegetables and Fruits at Home, which is a good introduction to pits, clamps and root cellars and so on. If you can find an old version of the USDA Agriculture Handbook 66, there's good information in there. Before you store anything, make sure you don't need to cure it at different temperatures and humidity levels than you need for storage. Like with sweet potatoes, for instance, you need to cure those at high temperatures with high humidity until the skins thicken up enough to store. Also, some of the starches convert to sugars. So just keep that in mind. I've got a chart on the handout. There's 25 different crops on there. If you can make places with these 4 different kinds of storage conditions, you'll be able to store at least those 25 crops and maybe more. And one of these is just for potatoes, B. So starting with A is the cold and moist conditions, which is like refrigerator, or a winter root cellar could be 32 to 40 Fahrenheit, 80 to 95% humidity. Most roots and greens and leeks will like those kind of conditions. The greens will need light. The second set is B, cool and fairly moist. So that's 40 to 50 Fahrenheit and 85 to 90% humidity. And that's potatoes. Potatoes really don't do well below 40. They get peculiarly sweet, and if you make fries with them, they go black. Type C are the cool and dry conditions, 32 to 50, quite a wide range there. 60 to 70% humidity, somewhat dry, it's not a desert. This is for garlic and onions, so you could use basements and barns for those sort of conditions in the winter probably. And then D is warm and dry to fairly moist, 50 to 60 Fahrenheit, 60 to 70% humidity. And that's for sweet potatoes and winter squash. And remember, look on the handout for this chart. This is only part of it. Next up, I'm going to talk about some different ways to store vegetables, such as in the ground. I mentioned that we can sometimes overwinter carrots. I mentioned winter leeks and Jerusalem artichokes and horseradish. If it gets cold, some of these crops you could mow across the greens and add insulation once the soil gets down to refrigerator temperatures. But if you add insulation, do watch out for rodents. You could simply use row cover or low tunnels to keep the worst of the weather off without using any kind of loose insulation. This can be, for some crops, it can be a way of storing them all winter, and you just open up the covers to harvest some whenever you need some, or it can be a method of delaying harvest. You don't have to harvest everything all at once. If there's some crops you can leave in the ground later, that really helps. Storage clamps or mounds, you can use these for pretty much any kind of root crop, also cabbages. What you do is you mark out a circular or oval pad of soil, you lay down some straw or other kind of insulation, and then you pile your harvested roots, harvested and trimmed roots, up in a rounded conal ridge, and then cover them over with more straw. And then you take a shovel and you go all around the mound, making a drainage ditch and slapping the soil up onto the straw. And this will help shed rain. You can leave a kind of chimney of straw sticking out for ventilation somewhere, not right on the top because you don't want rain to go in, somewhere on the top of the slope. You can mix vegetables in one clamp if you've only got small quantities. If you're doing a large scale, you would probably make a different clamp for each vegetable. You can open one end of a clamp, take out some vegetables, and then reseal it carefully. It works really pretty well. The next kind are pits and trenches, where you dig a hole in the ground, line it with straw, lay in your vegetables, and cover up with more straw. If you're worried about rodents, you can use large bins. Put the insulation inside, put the vegetables inside in layers, and then cover the lid with a mound of more insulation and soil. You can do this with trenches and boards as well. If you've got a dirt-floored shed or breezeway, this can make a great use of that space in the winter, because it's not going to get snow on top and it's not going to get ice on top. You do need to make sure you have enough insulation on the bottom, the sides and the top, at least 6 inches. Here's a photo of the open doorway of our root cellar. You can store potatoes for 5 to 8 months with a good in-ground root cellar. As I already said, 40 to 50 Fahrenheit. You will need to ventilate to get some air exchange and to keep the cellar in the ideal temperature range. So have a minimum thermometer in there and use it. You can use root cellars for other root vegetables or for apples or cabbages, but you need to be careful what you mix because of ethylene. I'm going to tell you about that later. Well, quite soon. Some people pack unwashed vegetables in boxes of sand or wood ash or sawdust or wood chips, and you can do that. That provides some insulation. These days we're more likely to use perforated plastic bags and refrigerated temperatures. You can hang cabbages and pepper plants upside down in a cellar to ripen or to store them. You can replant celery and leeks like really close together in tubs of soil. A great book about root cellaring is Nancy and Mike Booble's. It's just called Root Cellaring. It includes design, build and use of root cellars. So here's ethylene. It's a colorless, odorless gas. It's associated with ripening, sprouting and rotting. And some crops produce ethylene in storage, like apples, cantaloupes, ripening tomatoes. Anything that is chilled or wounded or has a bug attack, any of those things can cause damaged crops to produce ethylene. So that's where it comes from. And some crops, including most cut greens, are not sensitive to ethylene. You can store them in the same space as the fruits. But other crops are very sensitive and will deteriorate in a high ethylene environment. Potatoes will sprout, ripe fruits will go over the top, and carrots will become bitter. Nasty. So here are my books, Sustainable Market Farming and Year-Round Hoop House. And here are the resources. I'm not going to dwell on them here. So this has been Cold Hardy Winter Vegetables. I'm Pam Dawling. My website is sustainablemarketfarming.com. Thank you very much.